The rebellious period in a teenager's life is always a challenging stage when it's easy to make mistakes that one will later regret. Youthful maximalism can lead to tragic consequences because, in trying to break free from parental control, it's easy to fall into the clutches of a real monster. Today's story unfolded in the small town of New Partridge, Florida, USA. It's a typical American suburban community with a population of about 15,000 people. Located near Tampa, in a region with well-developed beach infrastructure, New Partridge is usually a quiet resort town with low crime rates where people feel safe. Even if some offenses do occur here, they are mostly minor and non-violent. But the events that took place in 2002 shocked the entire community. In the early 2000s, the Ashbrook family lived in New Partridge, Tara and Robert, with their 2 daughters, the older of whom was named Jooshen. She was born on February 21, 1986, in the small Native American town of Kokomo, where her parents lived at the time. But due to job issues, to improve their financial situation, the family moved to New Partridge when Jooshen was just learning to walk and her little sister was a newborn. In the new town, Tara and Robert were able to find good jobs and get their life on track. Their relationship was good, and the parents strived to give their children everything they needed. Noticing that Jooshen loved music and dance, they decided to develop her talents. Robert was especially insistent on this. So the girl began attending music lessons and taking vocal classes. This turned into a real passion for the child, which the parents were happy to support. As an older sister, Jooshen shared her enthusiasm with the younger one, who naturally imitated her and wanted to be like her. The small age gap only contributed to the closeness between the girls. Although initially it was perceived as just a hobby in entertainment, Jooshen gradually began to develop her talent more and more actively. The parents, noticing her zeal, started taking their daughter to various events and competitions to help her advance in this direction. They hoped that the girl would be able to turn her passion into something more, which she worked hard for. This was happening at the dawn of the internet, and the young heroine understood perfectly that online activity could help break into the scene. Her idée fixe became a singer's career, which would bring pleasure and good money in adulthood. The girl immersed herself in this so much that it really seemed as if she was preparing for a music career. Thanks to her talent, she was very popular in her town, which only further motivated the schoolgirl. Regular performances at various events became her calling card. Even in elementary school, the girl began writing poems and song lyrics. She also met a group of young people who were also into music. During her studies, she even recorded several demo compositions of her own. For this, Jooshen visited a recording studio, not asking her parents for help, but using her own pocket money that she managed to save. After that, the young singer started visiting various organizations related to the music industry and radio, trying to promote her compositions. She hoped that they would interest someone and she would find a producer. But of course, it was extremely difficult to break through in this direction, so there was no wild success. In fact, Jooshen had several plans. The parents repeatedly discussed different situations and options with her to secure her future. The girl's most cherished dream remained a music career, but if that didn't happen, she was ready to build success in another field without giving up. She was attracted to law, so in parallel with music, Jooshen planned to get a higher education. According to her plan, the income from her musical activities should have contributed to this. By 2002, when Jooshen turned 16, she entered the teenage rebellious phase. She started having conflicts with her parents, mainly because of her music career. The girl spent more and more time studying at school, writing songs, visiting the recording studio, and hanging out with friends. This negatively affected her academic performance. She began to fall behind in class, and her parents couldn't do anything about it. Even worse was that she started attending parties with older guys, in a not-so-good crowd, which caused her parents' disapproval. It was there that Jooshen was introduced to alcohol and At the same time, her family did not observe any particular success in the music field. So they insisted that it was time for their daughter to move on to Plan B and focus on getting an education. The mother and father were very worried about the girl's behavior, constantly pressuring her, trying to set her on the right path. They persuaded her to finish school successfully, continue her studies, and engage in music only as a hobby. The parents feared that in such a situation, their daughter would not be able to enter college at all. And without a proper education, the path to the musical Olympus would be closed to her. All attempts to help the young rebel cope with teenage troubles only led to quarrels and misunderstandings. After one such incident, Jooshen ran away from home for the first time. And it almost immediately became a regular occurrence. The parents tried to take control of their daughter, keep her under house arrest, but to no avail. Almost every night she would run away from home, although she would return by morning or even a few hours later. At first, this caused even more irritation among the parents. But eventually, Tara and Robert realized that pressure would not achieve anything. They decided to temporarily loosen control to let the teenager calm down and try to establish contact with her. Jooshen continued to run away from home frequently, but her parents were no longer so worried. They understood that their daughter was simply trying to manipulate them and could not give in to such childish provocations. On July 30, 2002, the 16-year-old protagonist, as usual, left home late in the evening to hang out with her crowd. She returned home around 2 in the morning. All this time, the girl spent at a party with friends, once again ignoring the curfews set by her parents. The mother and father woke up, hearing their daughter return from another outing. Tara went downstairs and met her. The smell of alcohol and drugs from the girl was immediately apparent. The woman thought it was too much. She snapped, once again accusing her daughter of disobedience and improper behavior. She insisted that she break off all relations with the bad company that constantly dragged her into some mischief. Robert just watched it and simply went to bed. He had already seen such outbursts of aggression dozens of times, which invariably ended the same way. The man did not want to resort to physical force, spoil the relationship with his daughter and wife, so he decided to walk away from the conflict. Left alone with the teenager, the woman could not cope. Jooshen left the house again, slamming the door. Restraining her was futile. Having calmed down, the mother also went to bed, thinking that in the morning she and her daughter would make peace. But the next morning, waking up, the parents noticed that Jooshen was still not at home, which was completely unusual for her. Now Tara and Robert became alarmed in earnest. They called their daughter's cell phone, but it was turned off. Then the parents began calling all of Jooshen's friends and acquaintances whose numbers they had. Despite the behavioral problems, the mother knew the phone numbers of all the teenagers with whom her daughter could stay overnight. But it turned out that she had not shown up at any of them that night. Then Tara decided to walk around all the places where Jooshen could also be when she ran away from home. Unfortunately, nowhere could they find either the girl herself or any traces of her nighttime whereabouts. The mother finally panicked, and the head of the family went to the nearest police station to report his daughter missing. Unfortunately, the local authorities of this small town knew Jooshen well. The girl had appeared in numerous similar statements when she ran away from home. Therefore, her parents' appeal was not given much attention at first. The police simply tried to calm the worried mother and father and send them home to wait for the return of their disobedient child, and not distract law enforcement for nothing. After all, this had happened more than once, and the girl had always safely returned. Tara and Robert told the police station about the recent quarrel, as well as that their daughter had not shown up at home in the morning, which was unusual for her. Moreover, none of her friends knew where she might be. All this was different from previous cases of escape, but it only confirmed the police in their opinion. They stated that the schoolgirl just needed to cool down after the quarrel, and she would definitely return, but later, when she thinks it over. According to the rules, at least 24 hours had to pass from the moment of disappearance to officially announce a search. So Tara and Robert had to return home hoping that Jooshen would be waiting for them there. Of course, this did not happen. In any case, the parents had to wait a day, but they did not waste time. Together with their younger daughter, they walked around the whole town in search of Jooshen, but to no avail. The next morning, an electrician was walking to work past the Shady Hills Road forest. It was usually quiet and peaceful here. The man often walked along this stretch of road and had never noticed anything unusual before. But this time, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something suspicious. The electrician decided to take a closer look. The closer he got, the more this object resembled the outlines of a human body, which was even more frightening. And when the man realized that it was indeed a mutilated corpse of a teenager, he rushed to call the police in horror. The law enforcement officers who arrived at the scene confirmed that the body belonged to a girl of 16 to 18 years old. It was immediately decided to check all the missing person reports that had been received in recent days. It became obvious that it was about Jooshen, as the victim fully matched the description. Although the photograph provided by the parents was of little help due to the girl's disfigured face. To conduct an official identification, it was necessary to call close relatives. But the authorities decided not to rush so as not to traumatize the family once again. The girl's body was thrown in the middle of the forest, with clothes lying nearby. There was a deep cut on her neck, as well as many other wounds all over her body. The corpse was immediately sent for autopsy to a forensic expert. At first, the detectives assumed a sexual motive for the attack because of the torn clothes. However, the forensic examination did not reveal any signs of rape. Interestingly, death was not caused by the deep cut on the neck. The girl died because the killer literally crushed her larynx, breaking her neck. And the cut was made after death. The victim had broken collarbones, and her entire upper chest was covered in bruises. Numerous signs of struggle were found, injuries on her arms and upper body. Obviously, the girl had desperately resisted the attacker for a long time until she was exhausted and gave up. The nature of the injuries clearly indicated intentional murder, because it was simply impossible to accidentally inflict such injuries. Jooshen's fierce struggle for her own life immediately gave the police valuable evidence. Under the victim's nails, forensic experts found skin particles and several hairs with the criminal's skin. During a thorough analysis of the materials collected on the body, it turned out that the girl was not killed in this alley. Most likely, she was brought here and thrown out to hide the traces or confuse the investigation. In the forest, they managed to find tire tread marks. At first glance, this might seem like an ordinary find. But these tracks could only have been left here at about the time the body was being transported, as it was raining then. Due to the fact that it was a sparsely populated area, the tread marks were clearly imprinted on the wet ground. This made it possible to obtain a high-quality cast. In addition, soil particles were collected from the roadside ditches for a more detailed analysis of where the body could have been brought from. As soon as the experts were finally sure that the discovered body belonged to Jooshen, her parents were informed of the tragic news. Both arrived at the identification, which was a devastating blow to the mother and father. Already during the first conversation with the police, Tara reported that their neighbor, John Henson, should be checked. Many attributed violent actions against children to this 60-year-old man. The woman recalled that he had harassed the schoolgirl. There were rumors about some unpleasant incident involving the police, but Tara could not say anything specific. Having arrived at the specified address, the law enforcement officers found only Mr. Henson's wife. She said that a few months before this event, her husband had moved out. He lived far away, the couple was going to divorce. According to the woman, at the time of the attack, John was not in the city, so his presence here was excluded. In addition, the police check did not reveal any documented facts of violence on Henson's part. And in general, contrary to Tara's words, he had no criminal history. The man turned out to be clean before the law, so he was immediately excluded from the circle of suspects. In the absence of other versions, the detectives focused on studying the evidence already collected. The tread marks and skin particles and hair of the alleged criminal were of the greatest interest. The tire tracks were subjected to a comprehensive analysis. It was found that tires of 7 brands had a similar pattern, and not very common ones. This allowed to significantly narrow down the search area. In addition, by the depth of the imprints, it was determined that it was not a passenger car or a truck, but something in between, for example, a large pickup truck or van. Meanwhile, a woman came to the police station and reported that she had seen Jooshen on the morning of July 31st. This meeting took place approximately a few hours after the girl's last escape from home, which made it possible to clarify the time frame. The witness said that early in the morning she received a call from a girl who introduced herself as Jooshen and asked to speak to her son. But the young man was not in the city, so the stranger asked if the woman could give him a letter. The mother agreed to act as an intermediary. Around 9 a.m., the girl did arrive at the witness's house and handed over an envelope. According to the woman, Jooshen got out of a red pickup truck driven by a man in his 40s with short hair. During the transfer of the letter, nothing suspicious was noticed, except that the teenager was clearly in a hurry. The woman did not get a good look at the driver's face, so she could only provide an approximate description. Be that as it may, the police had no other information. The witness gave the detectives not only the letter, but also the phone number from which the girl had called. It all seemed interesting, as the car matched the evidence found. There was nothing special in the note, Jooshen was simply informing the guy about breaking up with him. But the phone number turned out to be much more interesting. The detectives immediately dialed it, and the call was answered by a man who identified himself as Philip Parton. According to him, on the morning of July 31st, he was returning home with his daughter and saw a girl on the road who was hitchhiking. Philip stopped and agreed to give her a ride. It was Jooshen. She asked to use his mobile phone to call some woman. Then she asked to take her to this person's house to give an envelope to her friend. Philip did not refuse. On the way, they stopped by a supermarket, and then the girl went somewhere in an unknown direction. After talking to Parton, the police asked him to come to the station to officially record his testimony. The man agreed, but he did not show up, neither the same evening or the next day. The detectives regarded this as a bad sign. They tried to contact Philip again, but to no avail, the number was turned off. This only increased the suspicion against him. Then the law enforcement officers decided to check in whose name this phone number was registered. It turned out that Philip Parton was not just a good Samaritan who gave rides to hitchhikers, but an officially recognized criminal. In addition to numerous minor offenses, over the years of his life, he had managed to commit one murder and was also suspected of another, of a girl of easy virtue. The last episode happened just a few years ago, when Philip turned 37. Moreover, he had previously been accused of murder. When mathematics teacher Harry Thorne was found strangled and without clothes in his own home, all the evidence pointed to Philip. The man fled, but in 1989 he was tracked down. During searches of the suspect, items that had disappeared from the murdered teacher's home were indeed found. This made it possible to link him to the brutal reprisal. And although Parton never confessed to the crime, the court sentenced him to 17 years in prison. After Philip's imprisonment, his lawyers did not stop fighting for their client's freedom. In the end, focusing on the numerous mistakes made by the judge, the defenders managed to get a review of the case. The retrial mitigated the sentence to 6 years in prison. However, Parton was released even earlier. Later, the man got a job as a developer in construction, where he met Martha. The woman was raising her daughter alone, and soon the couple had a daughter together, Poja. Years later, Philip and Martha's relationship reached an impasse, the exact reasons for which are not reported. After the divorce, a fierce struggle for custody of the younger girl unfolded. Somehow, despite his criminal past and extremely disturbing life upheavals, Parton managed to win the right to full care of the child. As of 2002, he continued to live with her. Now this officially recognized criminal was connected to the murdered girl. It seems that he was the last person to see her alive. The detectives understood that they had most likely missed Jooshen's killer. They kept calling Philip, but he never answered. Then the investigators decided to check the supermarket, which, according to the suspect, he and Jooshen had visited together. The cops obtained the surveillance camera footage and started analyzing the frames. It turned out that the man and the girl were indeed here on the day of her disappearance. On July 31st, Philip stopped in a shopping center parking lot together with Jooshen and his own daughter. They went into the store, bought something, and then drove away. After that, the girl delivered a letter to her ex-boyfriend's mother. Apparently, somewhere around this time, some incident occurred that led to the attack on the teenager and her murder. Unfortunately, at that time there were too few surveillance cameras on the streets, so it was not possible to track the suspect's further movements. Parton was put on the wanted list, which, given the considerable media coverage, became one of the most high-profile in the USA. Hundreds of testimonies were received from people who were either sincerely mistaken or simply seeking fame. Processing them took a lot of time. However, among this stream, truly valuable information sometimes slipped through. For example, it was possible to find out Philip's address thanks to his friend's appeal. He said that for several months, including after the murder, he shared a house with the wanted man and his daughter. It is noteworthy that at the time the friend visited the police station, the 6-year-old girl was no longer with Parton, which looked extremely alarming. By the time Philip's friend came to the police, he had already moved out of the apartment. The man had no idea where his buddy had gone. Fortunately, this information allowed tracking at least the fugitive's previous place of residence and obtaining valuable clues. The apartment was thoroughly searched. A small bedside table with bleach stains was found there, as well as microscopic drops of blood. The examination confirmed that they belonged to the deceased Jooshen. In addition, the red pickup truck that the police were looking for was registered to Philip. From now on, Parton was officially considered the main suspect in the murder. Apart from the fact that the criminal had escaped, the police realized that a 6-year-old girl, whom even a neighbor had not seen, was in his hands. The fate of the little one remained unknown. Law enforcement feared that the child might be in danger or that the killer would use his daughter as a hostage during the arrest. The next day, a woman named Martha came to the police station. She said that she saw an announcement about the search for Philip on the news. According to her confession, he was her ex-husband. Martha had seen him a few days before Jooshen's disappearance when she picked up her daughter. Parton behaved not very welcomingly, as usual. But unexpectedly, after the girl's disappearance, he brought their daughter to her mother early in the morning. Thus, the worst fears about the girl's fate did not come true, she was safe with her mom. Moreover, the detectives had the opportunity to talk to an extremely valuable witness who had seen Jooshen alive. The investigators questioned Philip's daughter. The girl recalled how she really returned with her father at night from some trip. She was dozing in the car, but suddenly noticed that her dad stopped and took an unfamiliar girl into the cabin. She introduced herself as Jooshen, started talking with Philip, and said that she had run away from her parents to travel by hitchhiking. She wanted to get to Los Angeles, show her songs there, and become famous as a singer. Later, the fellow traveler asked for a phone to call someone, then they stopped by a store and some house. After that, they went to the river, where they swam and fished. The child fell asleep, and when Parton's daughter woke up, Jooshen was no longer in the car. The father did not answer the question of where the stranger had gone, but simply took the little one to her mother. This seemed extremely strange, because usually Philip avoided contact with his ex-wife and reluctantly gave his daughter even for short visits. All these details only increased the suspicion against him. After the police talked to the criminal's daughter, he himself called the police station. Philip openly mocked law enforcement, calling each time from different locations. As soon as the cops calculated his whereabouts and came to arrest him, the suspect was no longer there. After a few such incidents, calls from him stopped altogether. Moreover, Parton went to ground thoroughly, for many months. The police had no idea where he was hiding. It seemed as if the criminal had vanished into thin air, no calls or payments on his accounts. Pardon was hiding so skillfully that at some point the investigators suggested that he was no longer in the country. But suddenly, almost a year later, during a routine check of a suspicious car, one of the patrolmen came across a vehicle that resembled Philip's wanted pickup truck. It seems that the guardians of order finally got on the trail. However, it turned out that someone else was already using this pickup. It was Pardon's friend, who tipped off the police about the fugitive. It was found out that all this time the suspect had been living with a roommate, had no official registration, and therefore remained unnoticed. Philip was finally tracked down, although they had to act with extreme caution so that he would not escape again. The criminal was hiding in Fayetteville, North Carolina. When the suspect was finally detained on October 28, 2003, the first thing they did was take hair samples from him. They were compared with the hair found under Jooshen's nails. They matched. The tread pattern of his pickup truck tires also matched the tracks found at the crime scene. Despite all the evidence against him, Pardon simply refused to talk to the police and did not admit his guilt in the murder of the teenager. According to the reconstruction of events that the prosecution presented to the jury at the trial, after running away from home, Jooshen got into the car of a stranger. Since he had a little girl with him, she trusted the man. He gave her a phone, went to the store with her, helped deliver the letter. Pardon did everything to gain Jooshen's trust even more. And then, when his daughter fell asleep, he took the opportunity to attack the passenger, probably intending to rape her. But the girl put up a desperate resistance, so the rapist's intentions did not come true. Enraged, he killed Jooshen and took the body to the apartment where he lived at the time. After that, his daughter woke up, and Philip took her to her mother. Then the criminal returned to get rid of the corpse. He cleaned up the crime scene and took Jooshen's body to a remote corner of the forest in Florida. During the trial, the accused's behavior towards Tara and Robert, the parents of the murdered girl, was the most shocking. Every time the woman accidentally looked at him, the criminal would begin to smile and wink. It seemed that he did not feel any emotions or remorse about what happened. The man did not plead guilty, but there was more than enough evidence against him. The jury found Philip Pardon guilty of first-degree intentional murder. On December 1, 2008, by a vote of 9-3, he was sentenced to death. The death penalty is still provided for in the state of Florida. After the verdict was announced, while the convict was in the death row cell, his lawyers began the appeal process. In the end, Pardon managed to save his life. In 2024, the death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the right to parole. Dear viewers, today we will dive into an extraordinarily mysterious and intriguing story. Don't forget to share your ideas for future videos in the comments. I always read them with great interest. And now, let's get straight to our topic. Sometimes, the criminal can be much closer than the investigators think, but catching the villain is not so easy, especially if you yourself cross the line of the law and fear punishment. Lois Duncan was born on April 28, 1934 in the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. Later, the family moved to Sarasota, Florida. Her parents were true masters of circus photography and often published their work in popular magazines. From an early age, the girl was constantly surrounded by circus performers, which greatly inspired her. However, despite this, she did not see herself as a photographer, but dreamed of becoming a writer. Lois turned out to be a real child prodigy. At the age of 10, she wrote her first short story, which was published in a children's magazine. And at 13, she managed to sell her own article. The young talented girl became a regular contributor to newspapers and magazines. In 1952, Lois graduated from high school and entered Duke University. It was there that she met her first husband, Joseph Cardoza. But already in 1953, she was forced to quit her studies, giving preference to family. However, this did not prevent her from continuing her writing career. During this time she published over 300 articles. In her marriage to Joseph, Lois gave birth to daughters Robin and Carrie, and later a son, Brad. But after 10 years, this union broke up and our heroine moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she began teaching journalism at the local university. Although she did not have a specialized education, one of her friends held a leadership position there. This allowed Lois to substitute for the main teachers. She did not give up writing and during this time created 48 books for readers of all ages, from children to adults. But she gained the greatest fame with her young adult thrillers. Especially the bestseller, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Lois was even unofficially dubbed the Queen of Teen Thrillers. Critics and journalists often called her that. She was considered an innovator in the literary field. The writer's talent was highly valued. She received awards in 16 U.S. states and 3 more countries, and in 1992 she was awarded the prestigious Edgar Award. Even before these events, in 1965, Lois married for the second time. Her chosen one was an electrical engineer, Donald Arquette, who already had a son from a previous marriage, Donald Jr. In this union, Lois gave birth to a third daughter, who was named Caitlin. All the children of our heroine were also extremely talented and achieved success, mostly in creative fields. By 1989, the couple's 3 older children were still living with their mother and stepfather in Albuquerque, in a spacious, beautiful house in a prestigious area. Caitlin Arquette, whom her family affectionately called Kate, was born on September 18, 1970. Although she did not show any special creative inclinations, the girl was very active and energetic. In high school, Kate was very sociable and popular, in part due to her ambitions. Unlike her creative relatives, she dreamed of becoming a doctor. Kate studied hard and worked a lot, so on June 14, 1989, she graduated from high school with honors. By that time, she had already been dating a guy named Dung Nguyen for a year and a half. He was a Vietnamese immigrant with a difficult fate before moving to America. Dung often talked about his terrible childhood and that in the States he hoped to build a better life than in his homeland. He was 8 years older than Caitlin, but the girl lied to her relatives that the age difference was only 4 years. This was because her parents did not approve of such a significant age gap between the lovers. After graduation, Kate got a job in a clothing store and waited for the start of the fall semester at the University of New Mexico. It was a wonderful summer, full of pleasant chores, but the relationship with Dung somewhat overshadowed the carefree time. On July 16, 1989, Caitlin came to her parents and admitted that the relationship with Dung was far from as cloudless as she had previously thought. The girl wanted to break up with the guy, but hesitated. Kate did not want to return to her parents' house, because she liked the new rented apartment. And Dung did not want to move out and behave defiantly. At the same time, he justified himself with Vietnamese traditions, according to which a woman had to obey a man unquestioningly, which Kate did not do. Moreover, despite the fact that the girl independently paid the rent and utilities, the guy did not help her financially at all. Leaving her parents, Caitlin said that she planned to visit her friend Sharon. They became friends shortly before these events, but had already managed to get close. However, Kate's relatives had not even met her. The girl left her mother Sharon's number so that she could contact her if necessary, and left the house at 6:15 p.m. At first, our heroine was going to go for ice cream, and then get to her friend's place. It seemed that everything was going according to plan, but suddenly around midnight, Lois and Donald received a call from the local emergency room. At 6 p.m., Caitlin was brought there with an injury, but no details were reported to the relatives, only asking them to come to the hospital urgently. As it turned out, around 11 p.m., a patrol officer drove by, who noticed 2 suspicious cars on the side of the road. He decided to check if something had happened. Next to one of the cars stood an unfamiliar young man. When the officer approached the vehicle, he saw a bloody Caitlin lying in the front seat of her own car, moaning in pain. The girl's car was significantly damaged, and it seemed that she had been in an accident. Law enforcement called for backup and medics. Upon arriving at the scene, the police decided not to touch the vehicle, which made it possible to notice that the damage to the car did not correspond to a typical picture of an accident. Experienced forensic experts noted that the side window on the driver's side seemed to be broken by bullets. It was assumed that 2 bullets hit the windshield of the red Ford Tempo driven by the girl and wounded her in the head. After that, the out-of-control car drove through 3 lanes, drove into oncoming traffic and crashed into a lamppost on the sidewalk. Caitlin was still alive, but could not say anything. She was urgently hospitalized in critical condition. At this stage, the version of an accident due to a crash looked extremely doubtful. Based on the injuries the girl received, the position of the car and its condition, it rather seemed that someone had attacked Kate and shot through the side window. She received 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but for now these were only assumptions. Meanwhile, the doctors provided assistance to the girl and connected her to life support devices. The relatives were told the terrible news: the chances of survival were minimal. The young man whom the police found at the scene was questioned as a witness and released. He was considered just a random eyewitness who stopped to find out what happened to the victim. The guy did not arouse suspicion, so after clarifying all the details, he was let go. The officers focused on the victim. In her car, they found a note with the address of her friend's house, Sharon Smith. Given the suspicions that the incident was a deliberate attack, not an accident, the police decided to work out this lead. There were no other versions at that time anyway. According to the victim's friend, they met around 9:30 p.m. and had dinner together. Caitlin was very upset, constantly crying and periodically calling her boyfriend Dung, but did not want to meet with him, only trying to find out where he was. Around 10:40 p.m., after another call, Caitlin decided to return to her parents' house. It seemed that she was afraid to go to her apartment to her boyfriend. That's it, Sharon suggested that her friend stay with her, but she refused. Sharon had a bad feeling, but she could not persuade Kate. The girl was determined. She left at 10:45 p.m. in the direction of her parents' house, where she was going to spend the night. Having learned about the conflict between the victim and her boyfriend Dung, the detectives decided to check this information. Around 5 a.m. they arrived at the apartment rented by the couple. The guy opened the door, looking sleepy, as if he had just woken up and had no idea what had happened to his beloved. Upon hearing the news, Dung was shocked. He said that he had spent the whole evening with friends playing pool and drinking. He was brought home around 10 p.m., waited for the girl, but never saw her, so he went to bed. Friends confirmed his alibi. The officers immediately decided to search the apartment for possible evidence. Dung did not object. The police were interested in his note for the girl. "Dear, where are you? I know you're still angry, I'm so sorry, I miss you. I went to your mom's to return the books. See you. With love." According to Dung, no one called him and told him what had happened. Detectives asked if he had a gun, because the girl was reportedly shot. But he denied it. A test for the presence of gunpowder residue on Dung's hands was also conducted in the apartment. As it turned out later, the result was negative. After that, the police left. And Dung himself immediately rushed to the hospital, joining Caitlin's loved ones who were worried about her. Lois said that she heard the guy mutter to himself several times, it was his fault. The doctors managed to stabilize Caitlin's condition, but it turned out that due to internal bleeding, her brain died. The girl's life was supported only by devices. Just a few hours after the incident, the relatives realized that Caitlin would never regain consciousness. And they had to make a difficult decision. On July 17, Kate was disconnected from life support. At 1:25 p.m. she was pronounced dead. The mother knew that in the event of such a situation, Kate would have wanted to become an organ donor. The girl passed away at the age of 18, but was able to save several other people. Now it remained to find out what really happened to Kate. Detectives told the family that the incident could have been a random shooting. In recent months, brazen attacks on the roads had become more frequent in this area. so the victim probably just found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Several gangs operated here, feuding with each other, dividing the territory. On June 24, Mexicans shot a man right in his car. 3 days later, during a road conflict, another man was killed by being stabbed 3 times in the heart. On July 4, a third person was shot. The attacks occurred with horrifying regularity. Bandits shot guys from rival groups right on basketball courts, driving past in cars. Perhaps they confused Caitlin's car with someone else's from their competitors and opened fire. But the girl's relatives did not believe in such a version of the investigators. Law enforcement continued to ignore any other options and insisted on their own. As a result, focusing only on the confrontation of local gangs, the investigation reached a dead end. And then the writer Lois decided to take matters into her own hands. Conducting her own investigation, Lois found out that on the day morning when they were all with Kate in the hospital, 3 calls were made from the girl's apartment. This happened just when Dung was with them, so he could not call himself. But then who was in the apartment, if only 2 people lived there? The woman found out that Dung's brother was supposed to meet Caitlin for the last time in March of the same year. The girl said that she and her boyfriend went to Disneyland, but in fact, suspicions arose about their involvement in some criminal activity. For Caitlin's mother, this seemed incredible. She had no idea that her decent and educated daughter, who was not in need of anything, could be connected with the criminal world through her boyfriend. Interestingly, the last call from the apartment was made just a minute after Caitlin was pronounced dead. At that time, Dung was still in the hospital next to his girl and her family and could not call anyone at all. As it became known, the trip to Disneyland was associated with scams to which the Vietnamese community was involved. Shortly before that, a staged accident occurred, and all the victims in it complained of various injuries, hoping to receive compensation through the court. Dung also participated in this scheme, who was supposed to receive money to settle the conflict. Having learned about this, Lois turned to the police and told the investigator all the details. She believed that this could have been the motive for the crime. Meanwhile, Dung was going through the loss of his beloved very hard. One night he suddenly came to Lois and asked for a sleeping pill, because he suffered from insomnia. The guy insisted that she give him the whole pack. Of course, the woman refused, and since then she seriously feared that Dung might harm himself. And not in vain, just 5 days after the tragedy with Kate, he took a knife and stabbed himself in the stomach. Fortunately, friends found him in time and took him to the hospital. The guy survived. At the clinic, he was interrogated by the police, who assumed that he might feel guilty because of his involvement in the crime. But Dung claimed that although he was in a state of confusion and depression, he was not involved in Kate's death. Lois believed in his innocence regarding the murder. But she was convinced that Dung knew more than he was saying, and it seemed that he was very afraid of something. These fears were confirmed by the victim's friend, Sharon, who said that on the night of the murder, Dung called her and said that Kate was dead. However, according to her, this happened much earlier than the police came to the apartment and informed him about the tragedy. That is, the guy was clearly hiding something and probably knew what really happened. Against the background of this news, immediately after being discharged from the hospital, the investigators arrested Dung. But he denied saying anything like that, and insisted on his innocence, assuring that he had no idea who could have killed the girl. The young man also denied his participation in any fraudulent schemes for the purpose of profit. The owner of the apartment rented by the couple provided the investigation with important information. It turned out that the girl did not have a peaceful life here. Caitlin repeatedly asked to change the locks and even to spend the night at the landlord's place, because she was afraid to stay in the apartment. It seems that her fears were related specifically to her boyfriend. The impression was that behind the doors, the nice guy Dung turned into a real tyrant and led a double life, being involved in crime. A police officer who later turned out to be related to criminal activity himself ended up at the crime scene. This officer was dismissed from law enforcement for participating in fraud and reselling stolen cars. The investigation showed that Vietnamese groups were involved in the theft of cars. The owner of the auto repair shop where the stolen cars were stored before being sold was acquainted with Kate. The circumstances were such that the innocent smart girl Caitlin got involved with a young man who was related to crime. But there was not enough evidence to get to the criminal. 6 months have passed since the girl's death. Finally, on January 11, 1990, a confidential informant contacted the police, reporting that 4 men were involved in the brutal massacre. The local department received testimony pointing to 4 potential suspects, Mexicans. Lois considered this version far-fetched. In her opinion, the police showed an incredible negligence. They didn't even bother to collect the shards of the shot glass that remained at the crime scene. And then it turned out that many of the reports were fabricated and did not rely on real eyewitness accounts. Nevertheless, the Mexicans were detained for a reason. A truck driver who accidentally witnessed the massacre told about a car he saw on the road. It was this car that the police found in January. Behind the wheel of the car in which the attackers were, was Cuviat Escobedo. He said that Miguel Garcia wielded the weapon, and Roberto Garcia and Dennis Martinez were also with them. On January 17, 1990, Roberto was detained and taken to the police station. The interrogation lasted about 2 hours, and the guy confessed to participating in the crime. After that, the other 3 were also arrested. Roberto claimed that it was Miguel who pulled the trigger, killing the girl. He allegedly shot at Caitlin's car 3 times. Shortly before that, Cuviat sold his Chevrolet Camaro, the same one that was recognized by the truck driver with whom the police spoke that night. Later, the Mexicans retracted their testimony. No compromising information about their involvement in the case could be obtained. And then Roberto Garcia suddenly stated that he actually saw nothing. The guy claimed that during the interrogation he was simply frightened by strong pressure and threats against him. Therefore, he told the police what they wanted to hear. Suspicions about Miguel led to a search of his house. Several weapons were found there, but not the pistol the girl was shot with. Eyewitness testimonies also did not provide clear answers. People were confused about the time, could not say exactly what car the criminals were in, and even gave the wrong numbers that did not match the Chevrolet Camaro. In the spring of 1991, all those detained in the Caitlin murder case were released. All charges against them were dropped, as it was determined that they were ready to confess to anything just to avoid incurring the wrath of the authorities. When the 4 main suspects were released, it was decided to talk to Dung again. This time the guy was much more open and honestly admitted to insurance fraud. He also reported that at least a dozen other Vietnamese were also involved in fraudulent schemes in the insurance industry. According to Dung, the first time he lied because his friend, whose name the guy refused to name, told him to do so. It seems that it was this friend who used the phone in the victim's apartment while Dung was not there. Lois feared that all these facts would be swept under the rug, so in 1992 she wrote a book titled, Who Killed My Daughter? This work attracted wide attention from the public and the media. The writer hoped in this way to reach the person who had information about the tragedy and could help the investigation. In 1995, Caitlin hired private detective Pat T. Caristo for the investigation. She was a former police officer with considerable experience and was considered one of the best detectives in the city. Pat found out that the young man met by law enforcement officers when they arrived at the scene of the tragedy was 21-year-old Paul Apodaca. This was the same guy who allegedly just drove by and wanted to help the victim. He was only questioned, his contacts were recorded and he was released, but he did not seem so innocent at all. According to the private detective, Kate was not the victim of a random accident. She was deliberately pushed off the road by another car, as evidenced by the damage to the vehicle. And very similar damage could have been on Paul's car, a gray Volkswagen Beetle, but no one documented it. And only after that, Kate was shot. The detective found out that Paul had a turbulent criminal past, and acquaintances saw him painting his car just a few days after the accident. It looked extremely suspicious, but the official version of the police contradicted these facts voiced by Pat. Unfortunately, her words were not enough. In 1997, a campaign was conducted aimed at achieving a new investigation into the Caitlin case. And finally, in 2003, the Commission for the Investigation of Unsolved Crimes got to work. Its investigators immediately confirmed the conclusions of the private detective. They believed that they did not shoot at the car on the move, but first pushed it onto the sidewalk, provoking a collision with a pole. But there was too little information to find new clues. Lois was not going to give up. She was advised to contact the famous female psychic Betty Much. The mother of the murdered girl had no illusions about such methods, but decided to try. And it did help to learn new details. The psychic firmly stated that Dung did not kill Kate, but perhaps he knows who did it. She saw another car that stopped on the sidewalk after the accident. 3 people were standing next to it. They were animatedly arguing about something, and they all looked like Asians. The psychic reported that she did not feel the involvement of the Vietnamese mafia, which closely cooperated with the police, in the murder. She insisted that the entire investigation was a complete fabrication, and they were trying to shift the blame on 4 Mexicans. This completely coincided with the beliefs of Lois and private detective Pat. The psychic could not say for sure, but she believed that the crime would not be solved in the near future, until the killer gives himself away. Also, during the reinvestigation, it was possible to uncover many strange incidents when people who could have some information were persecuted and intimidated. Of course, everything indicated that someone was deliberately obstructing the investigation. By 2003, all 4 suspects who could be found guilty had died under very strange circumstances. Unfortunately, the investigation reached a dead end in all directions. In 2014, Lois wrote a sequel to the book about the death of her daughter. By that time, the writer herself had already received threats more than once. She was sure that it was all the work of Vietnamese gangs. After the release of the book, Lois again began to receive threats. They sounded so serious that the woman decided to retrain in children's literature and no longer wrote about the Kate case. She devoted the rest of her life to trying to unravel the mystery of her own daughter's death. But she was not destined to live to see this moment. Lois passed away at the age of 82 on June 15, 2016. According to her husband, the woman suffered a series of strokes, which could have been the cause of death. Loved ones continued Lois's work and tried to achieve disclosure of the crime, but to no avail, until July 20, 2021. 32 years have passed since the death of Caitlin. And finally, it became known what really happened to her. One warm summer day, police arrested a man who was aimlessly wandering around the University of New Mexico campus. It turned out to be none other than Paul Apodaca. The same guy who was interrogated by law enforcement at the scene of the tragedy with Caitlin, and then released without suspecting anything wrong. At the time of his arrest, the man was 53 years old. He had a long history of violent crimes, including those of a sexual nature. But this time he admitted that all his life he felt a deep hatred for women, although now he repents. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but the psychic once said that it would be the feeling of guilt that would make a person confess to a crime. However, he began his story not with Caitlin, but admitted that he raped several other girls in the 80s and 90s. All information was carefully checked, each episode took several months. As a result, it was possible to prove that the first victim of Paul's murder was 21-year-old Althea Oakley, who died on June 22, 1988. The girl was returning from a party alone after a quarrel with her boyfriend when she was attacked. Paul stabbed her to death for no apparent reason, he just saw her on the street. A witness heard a scream and ran outside. He saw the man catch up with the girl and rushed to help. Paul left the victim to fend for herself and fled. Althea died in the hospital, and the criminal was never found. His next victim was 13-year-old Stella Gonzalez, who was walking with a friend at midnight on September 9, 1988. The criminal drove past in a car and noticed the girls. He stopped and, without warning, shot one of them in the back of the head, and the other fled. Both of these cases remained unsolved for many years. Now Paul's involvement in them has been proven. In December 2021, the man was charged with the murder of these two girls. And in February 2022, he was officially accused of the murder of Caitlin, which he also took upon himself. In all episodes, Paul was able to provide the police with such details that only the criminal could know. Kate became the same random victim for him. His choice was not justified by anything, he just drove by, saw Caitlin's car and decided to kill her. Paul stated that he was forced to confess by the feeling of guilt that had tormented him all these years. He sincerely repented of the pain he caused to the families of the deceased. The accused is currently in prison awaiting court hearings. In January 2024, for one of his crimes, the serial killer received 45 years in prison. He faces life imprisonment. How much do we really know about the people we pass by on the streets every day? It's entirely possible that behind an unassuming exterior lies something sinister and dangerous. Today's story will make you ponder what might be hidden in the depths of an ordinary person's soul. Some people come into this world to create, to radiate light like stars. But even they are not immune to encountering those who can cut their creative path short for just a few $100s. In 2006, in Manhattan, among the numerous offices converted from former residential spaces, there was a studio belonging to a rather well-known actress, director, and screenwriter named Adrienne Shelly. Her real surname was Levine. Adrienne was born on June 24, 1966, in Queens, New York, USA. When the girl turned 2, the family moved to Long Island. From an early age, Adrienne exhibited an innate passion for theatrical arts. She was a true young actress through and through. Noticing this, her parents did everything to foster their daughter's talents, enrolling her in various theater studios and acting courses. At the age of 10, Adrienne found herself in one of the most popular art centers. It had once been attended by such famous actors as Robert Downey Jr. and Natalie Portman. It was here that young Adrienne realized the stage was her calling. At 11, she landed her first real role, playing the lead in a musical. Later, she would admit this was the impetus for her future accomplishments. Alongside her favorite pursuit, she was a typical teenager who loved spending time with friends, easily making new ones thanks to her outgoing nature. Everything seemed to be going splendidly, but at the age of 12, Adrienne suffered her first major loss. Her father Sheldon passed away unexpectedly. It was then that the girl decided to adopt the stage name Shelly, thus immortalizing her dad's name. Sheldon had always supported the young talent to a greater extent than her mother. After the father's death, the woman even tried to steer her daughter in a different direction, advising Adrienne to choose a more traditional major for her university studies. The mother also approved of her daughter's aspiration to eventually become an actress. However, she believed it to be an oversaturated field with fierce competition, where breaking through was nearly impossible, and perhaps her daughter should opt for something simpler. But the young actress was unstoppable. From the very beginning, Adrienne moved resolutely along her chosen path. According to most sources, she enrolled in Boston University's film production program with a focus on directing. She never completed her university education, but the knowledge she acquired proved sufficient for future success. Persistence mattered most, as the girl never lost faith in herself and relentlessly forged ahead. At 18, she moved out of her parents' home together with 3 other girls she had studied with at university. They all dreamed of becoming actresses, but initially, it all came down to auditions and rejections, at least for her friends. However, this was a typical situation in the film industry. There was always extremely high competition for any role. Adrienne never gave up hope of finding her place in cinema, dedicating all her free time to auditions. She was quite fortunate to quickly land several minor roles in films as an extra. It was enough to make a living. A defining event took place in 1989. She met film director Hal Hartley, who offered her the lead role in the movie The Unbelievable Truth. For Adrienne, this was her big break and the official start of her acting career. Moreover, her relationship with the director developed remarkably well. She became his muse. This allowed the girl to secure role after role in his films. Thus, the young actress became known not only in New York but also in Hollywood. Gradually, having established herself in the largest hub of filmmaking in the United States of America, she got the green light. Several offers for leading roles in films came from Los Angeles, but Adrienne Shelly turned most of them down. She wanted to stay and continue building her career here. New York was a more powerful center of the film industry for her, even greater than Hollywood. Adrienne did not miss the opportunity to develop. She focused on work, methodically laying the foundation for future success without changing her place of residence, and it worked. The girl starred in numerous films, including theatrical productions and comedies. During this period, it occurred to Adrienne to try her hand at being a screenwriter and director. In 2001, fate brought her together with Andy Ostroy, with whom she entered into a romantic relationship. The couple got married, and in 2003, they had a daughter named Sophie. While expecting her firstborn, the mother-to-be set about writing the script for a romantic comedy called Waitress. The plot was quite realistic. The protagonist, while pregnant, is forced to flee from her cruel husband who had abused her throughout their married life. It was a rather bold move, as pregnancy is usually portrayed in a positive light in films, but Adrienne Shelly decided to show the other side of this delicate condition, focusing on the trials that befall a woman during this period. She was convinced that such a perspective would undoubtedly work as something innovative. After Sophie's birth, the woman made the decision not to abandon her work in the film industry. The movie was indeed a success. It was a true moment of glory for Adrienne. When the film was presented to audiences in 2007, Adrienne had directed it herself and played one of the leading roles, but she was not destined to revel in the triumph. During the making of Waitress, she rented an office on Abingdon Square in the West Village of Manhattan. It was an ordinary apartment where Adrienne spent time alone. For her, this place turned into a kind of safe haven. Adrienne created here, and for this purpose, she crafted a special atmosphere. The woman treated the makeshift studio with great affection. Extremely reverently. She was fastidious, even excessively so. This was noted by everyone who visited her at her workplace. It was evident that Adrienne Shelly had a great future ahead of her. All the more horrific and shocking was the tragic end to her stellar career. On November 1, 2006, the family was living an ordinary day. As always, around 7 a.m., Adrienne woke up and began getting ready to go to work at her office. Her husband Andy and daughter Sophie also got up. As usual, the husband was supposed to take the girl to kindergarten. He was also an actor and producer, so after that, he would go to work, giving his wife a ride along the way. Usually, throughout the day, the couple constantly kept in touch with each other. They would call and share all the events happening around them. The couple had not broken this tradition for years. On November 1, Adrienne Shelly was silent, which seemed extremely unusual. She never called once, did not answer any of her husband's calls. At first, this did not worry Andy too much. He knew how devoted his wife was to her work. She might have been busy, as it was on this very day that she planned to start several new projects at once. The husband thought she had simply become too engrossed and did not want to bother her with trifles. His workday lasted until evening. Having finished his shift, Andy called his wife again, who once more ignored him. It all seemed strange now. Around 5:30 p.m., the father picked up his daughter from daycare. Adrienne was still out of reach, and the situation truly began to raise alarm. Whenever the wife was not busy, she always found time to communicate with her husband, at least calling back or sending a message that she was very occupied. But this time, everything looked increasingly alarming. During this period, the weather in New York left much to be desired, so Andy would often pick up his wife from her rented office on such gloomy days. He intended to do the same this time. So he called his wife to agree on a time, but she did not answer again. Andy could no longer reassure himself, his wife's behavior seemed too uncharacteristic. The father took the child to the grandmother's house and asked her to watch Sophie while he went to his wife's office. Andy did not have spare keys to his wife's office. As soon as he arrived at this apartment building, he immediately approached the doorman, who was supposed to have a duplicate key. The concierge refused to give it to the man due to strict rules, so Andy tried to persuade him to go upstairs together. The doorman knew Adrienne Shelly well, partly because she was already famous, and he was also acquainted with her husband. The employee had indeed noticed that the story's heroine had not left the building all day. It was already too late. The woman should have finished work and been getting ready to go home. The concierge agreed to Andy's proposal, but upon reaching the right floor, he stopped, handing over the keys. However, they were not needed. The door turned out to be unlocked. The actress had a habit of treating her office with extreme reverence. She always locked it, even if she was leaving for a short while. Naturally, she would have locked the door from the inside so that no one would disturb her. Finding himself in the studio, the husband immediately noticed his wife's clothes and shoes in their usual place. A special area had been designated for this, so she had to be inside. Andy immediately called out her name, but there was no response. The tension grew with each passing moment. He began feverishly searching the premises, room by room. In the kitchen, there was a bag of groceries that no one had touched. In the bedroom, a sheet had been ripped off the bed, but there were no signs of the woman's presence. Andy reached the bathroom, and there he saw the body of his 40-year-old wife, Adrienne Shelly. The woman was hanging from a sheet attached to the shower rod. Struck with horror, the man screamed and instantly rushed to take down his beloved, trying to help. The apartment building's superintendent was on the stairwell landing at the time. Hearing the scream, he immediately called the police and an ambulance. Realizing something terrible had happened. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they found Andy there, sobbing. He was shocked by what had occurred and could not recover for a long time. Investigators concluded that the successful actress and director had committed suicide. But Andy categorically rejected this version. He would not even entertain the idea of such a turn of events. The man knew for certain that his wife had never suffered from depression, had no mental disorders or any addictions. Not even the slightest preconditions were found that could have prompted a person to voluntarily take their own life. On the contrary, during that period, her career was rapidly ascending, everything was going splendidly. Each subsequent production surpassed the previous one. Adrienne Shelly had a wonderful relationship with her husband and little daughter, whom she adored. Even from a moral standpoint, it raised numerous questions. Adrienne had lost her father when she was only 12, so she would never have done something like that to her own daughter. However, law enforcement officials continued to insist on their position, arguing that a depressive state is not necessarily associated with problems in one's personal life or family. All this can happen covertly, imperceptibly to others. Outwardly, a person may appear completely normal and happy until the very last moment, and no one will even suspect the serious issues they were actually struggling with all this time. But Andy was not going to give up. He kept insisting and pressuring law enforcement officers, demanding a more thorough investigation. He considered the initial conclusions absurd, was convinced his wife had been murdered, and was determined to prove it. A serious battle lay ahead of him, as the autopsy results confirmed that the cause of Adrienne Shelly's death was strangulation by a sheet wrapped around her neck. And after that, the widowed Andy only intensified the pressure, continuing to insist that the case should be treated as a homicide. Of course, such statements required at least some solid grounds. No blood or signs of struggle were found in the office. Practically nothing that could indicate the presence of an outsider in Adrienne's studio on the day of her death, but there were strange aspects. Would a person ready to take their own life go grocery shopping and behave as if they had plans for tomorrow? During a second, more thorough examination of the crime scene, something suspicious was discovered. a barely noticeable shoe print was found on the toilet lid, suggesting that the traces could indeed have been left by an outside party. It seemed as if the perpetrator or the victim herself had stood on the toilet lid to reach the shower rod and tie the sheet. This could have also facilitated the lifting of the body, and to Andy, it was obvious that this print was left by the criminal. The man told the detectives about his wife's obsession with cleanliness in her studio, how she had even set up a special cabinet and stand near the door where all visitors had to place their shoes. She did not allow anyone to walk around the apartment in their outdoor footwear, and the husband had repeatedly seen how people who forgot this rule incurred extreme displeasure from his wife. Obviously, only someone who entered the premises without her permission could have left a shoe print on the toilet lid. Without asking for Adrienne Shelly's consent, his words were confirmed by all the actress's close acquaintances who had been to her studio at least once. The detectives decided to pay more attention to these traces, examined the tread pattern, analyzed the shoe size. The results corroborated the widower's words. The pattern did not match either the configuration or the size of the shoes worn by the story's heroine and her husband. Moreover, fingerprints were found on the shower rod that did not belong to the deceased. Someone had tried to wipe them off but had not done so thoroughly enough. All the people from the victim's inner circle were checked, but none of them wore such shoes. The fingerprints also did not match those of the couple's acquaintances. Analysis of the trace on the toilet lid showed that it had been left by chalk or similar dust. Obviously, such dirt is rarely found in offices or apartments where no renovations or other construction-related activities are being carried out. Investigators suggested that the trace could have been left by someone involved in the construction industry or renovations in some way. Initially, they thought Adrienne might have been expecting a repairman that day, but no one had heard anything about it. The woman would have certainly told her husband about it, but the studio was indeed in perfect condition. Adrienne had no need for a contractor's services. One of the investigators working on the case recalled an interesting detail. When the actress was found dead, noise could be heard in her studio coming from the floor below. It sounded as if the workers were breaking something, working with hammers and jackhammers. Of course, the police treated this assumption with some skepticism but decided to check. Renovations were indeed underway below Adrienne Shelly's studio. The apartment belonged to a man who had no connection to the victim, was not even acquainted with her. He confirmed that on November 1st, workers were here performing the final stage of the renovation. He himself was not living in the apartment at the time, as the construction company was supposed to demolish walls and erect new partitions. This seemed interesting because, with such work, a lot of dust is indeed generated, leaving white traces. The apartment owner allowed the detectives to freely inspect the premises. Indeed, there was a lot of dust here, samples of which were taken for examination. Later, the laboratory confirmed that this dust was identical to the traces found in Adrienne's apartment, meaning one of the workers had been to her office. After that, the detectives visited the general contractor, the Bradford Company, which had provided the workers. The police wanted to find out who exactly was at the site during that period. At this stage, difficulties arose, as it turned out that it was common practice for this organization to engage unofficially employed workers to reduce the cost of services. At that time, this had become a widespread phenomenon in the USA due to the influx of immigrants. Many of the employees found themselves here illegally, without proper visas. However, the organizer of this particular project was able to list all the people who were in the apartment on November 1st after some time. The most suspicious of them turned out to be Diego Pilco. At that moment, the guy was only 19 years old. He had arrived in the United States shortly before the tragedy and immediately got a job at Bradford to save up money for a start. First of all, he planned to pay off the person in his homeland of Ecuador who had lent him money for the move to the USA. The guy behaved strangely, sometimes even alarmingly. Diego was quickly found. He was still working for this company. The young man was taken to the police station for questioning, and the detectives did not beat around the bush. They bluntly asked him about the murder of Adrienne Shelly. Contrary to expectations, Diego did not deny it and immediately confessed. It happened almost as soon as he found himself in the room. While recounting his version of events, he repeatedly emphasized that it was an accident. The guy insisted he was a good person who had simply found himself in a hopeless situation, desperately struggling with financial hardship. According to his confession, on November 1st, he was in the apartment located one floor below Adrienne's studio, together with several young people. They were all performing one of the final stages of the work. Due to the demolition of walls, it was very noisy, but this seemed like a regular matter. According to the guy, Adrienne came down just an hour after they started working. The young woman was extremely dissatisfied with such loud noise, rudely yelling at them that the workers were preventing her from concentrating. Diego described her behavior as if the stranger was trying to humiliate him, considering her work more important. She demanded that the workers stop making noise, which seemed absurd since wall demolition cannot be done silently. Moreover, they were not violating anything. The young men calmly explained the situation to Adrienne Shelly, but the woman would not listen. She entered the apartment and started waving her arms. In a fit of anger, Diego grabbed a hammer and threw it in her direction. The actress miraculously managed to dodge the tool. After that, she screamed even louder and began threatening to call the police. With those words, the woman left the apartment and headed upstairs to her place. Diego followed her. He realized he had gone too far, so he begged Adrienne not to call the police. He feared there would be problems, and he would face deportation to his homeland. Adrienne would not listen. She was furious when she entered her studio. Diego grabbed her arm and yanked it, continuing to persuade her not to report to the police. She probably perceived it all as an attack and started screaming. Diego lost self-control again, hit the woman, after which she fell, struck her head, and went still. The young man assumed he had not calculated his strength, and the woman had died from the blow to the head. He was seized by real panic. The construction worker locked himself in the office and began contemplating his next moves. Adrienne was not getting up, not regaining consciousness. Diego finally realized he had killed a person. After that, he decided to cover up the traces of the crime, so he took a sheet from the bed and staged a suicide in the bathroom. This was the initial version of the young man's confession, but the police did not believe it. The first discrepancy noticed by law enforcement was the complete absence of dust on the deceased's shoes. If she had indeed entered the apartment where renovations were underway, as the killer claimed, traces would inevitably have been left on her shoes. Moreover, the actress's shoes were on a specially designated shelf, meaning she had taken them off, which also contradicted the young man's story. From his words, there was simply no time to take off the shoes and put them there. Another important contradiction was the total absence of witnesses to Adrienne Shelly's aggressive behavior. Even the other workers did not confirm the criminal's words that the woman had come down to them and argued. During that period, there were enough neighbors in the apartments who would have heard both the scandal and the commotion raised by the actress. However, no one heard anything. Another discrepancy was noticed by Andy, the victim's husband. He pointed out the lack of cash in his wife's wallet, although she was a person who preferred using bills rather than credit cards. She always carried at least a few $100s on her. Sometimes she carried even larger sums for various needs. This small quirk allowed them to understand the likely motive. The illegal immigrant obviously just wanted to profit at Adrienne's expense, and most importantly, the medical examiner established that the circumstances of the woman's death did not match. Shelly was still alive when she was hanged, and the cause of death was strangulation. However, no head injury was found. Despite all the inconsistencies, Diego maintained for quite some time the version that Adrienne Shelly herself had provoked the conflict. Under the pressure of obvious contradictions, Diego's story began to undergo certain changes. Detectives spoke with the suspect's inner circle to understand what kind of person he was in general. Unfortunately, he interacted with few people outside of work. Everyone who had dealings with him knew that Diego Pilco was struggling with financial difficulties and desperately wanted to pay off his debts. Otherwise, he seemed like an ordinary young man trying to gain a foothold in the USA. After talking to the residents of this apartment building, several witnesses were found at once who spoke about Diego's suspicious behavior. According to one girl, the suspect had an unpleasant habit of staring at females for a long time. This gaze caused alarm. However, no one noticed any aggression on his part. He did not attack anyone else. Andy continued to insist that Diego's version was a complete lie. He was simply trying to justify himself. The wife had never behaved aggressively, treated other people's work with respect, no matter what it was. At the same time, the absence of cash in the wallet indicated the real purpose. Diego could have ended up in Adrienne Shelly's apartment for the purpose of robbery. Equipment, appliances, and other valuables had not disappeared, but a few $100s were missing. Shortly before the trial, scheduled for 2008, the defendant voiced a new version that seemed more convincing than the previous one. According to him, Diego Pilco arrived at the workplace together with Adrienne. When they were riding in the elevator, he was staring at the young woman. Suddenly, he realized he had seen the actress somewhere before and quickly figured out that a celebrity was in front of him. Diego instantly concluded that she had money, and this was a chance to solve all his financial problems. In his opinion, there was certainly something to gain in the actress's apartment. He pretended to go up to the very top floor. Thus, he tracked where Adrienne got out and which apartment the heroine of this story headed to. He closely watched and listened throughout the day, calculated the moment the woman left, probably to get to the store. She returned some time later, habitually undressed, leaving all her clothes and shoes in the closets. The woman had brought bags, did not close the door behind her, as her hands were occupied. She went to the kitchen, apparently to put away the purchased groceries. Diego closely monitored her every move, having positioned himself on the stairwell landing. The guy saw the half-open door, the bag from which the wallet was sticking out. The temptation turned out to be too great, an opportunity for theft presented itself to him. The criminal carefully peeked into the apartment, made sure Adrienne did not see him, so he went inside, grabbed the wallet, took out the cash. When he wanted to put it back, the woman returned and came face to face with him. She screamed and rushed to the phone, obviously to call the police. Diego panicked, caught up with her, covered her mouth and nose. She quickly lost consciousness from suffocation. He understood that leaving the robbed victim alive was too risky. Adrienne Shelly had seen the worker from the floor below more than once. She could easily recognize the robber. The criminal decided to stage a suicide, using a sheet and the shower rod for this purpose. He confirmed that he stood on the toilet lid to reach and hang the victim. At the trial, the criminal apologized to the actress's family, whose creative path was so tragically cut short. Of course, no one was going to forgive him. Andy hoped that he would manage to secure a life sentence for this brute. All the more shocking to him was the court's decision. For unintentional murder, Diego was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He would be released shortly before his 45th birthday. Despite the fact that this decision seemed unfair, it was final. After all these tragic events, Andy made every effort to immortalize his wife's name in history. He established a foundation of the same name that provides scholarships and financial support to young female directors. In addition, the husband made a movie about her that reflects the tragic path of this strong woman. For its final episode, he even met face-to-face with Diego, who gave a short interview and recounted the story of his crime on camera. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.